Imagine an area so important to regional and global trade that wars spanning from ancient history to the modern day have been fought over it. One which serves as a critical cornerstone of cultural and religious interactions in the Middle East, and a strategic naval route which can shave thousands of kilometers off any ship's journey. The area in question is the Suez Canal, which in the last 5 years alone has had 90,000 ships pass through, carrying 5.5 billion tons of cargo. This video series will be covering the history of the Suez Canal, and today we will be explaining the canal's importance, its location, and its predecessors. Before we discuss the Suez Canal, we must first establish what exactly a canal is, and why they are so important. A canal is defined as a long straight passage dug in the ground and filled with water for boats and ships to travel along. From this satellite image, we can clearly see how the Suez Canal serves as a waterway between the Mediterranean and Red Seas. Economically, canals can reduce both travel times and transport costs. It provides an alternative to overland routes or longer sea routes. Waterways tend to be cheaper than other forms of transport, such as road or rail, for a variety of reasons. Aside from canals and ports, water is basically free, and it does not need to be maintained or built. Initial construction costs for shipping routes are proportionally lower, as natural waterways already form much of their length. In addition, economies of scale are much more prevalent in shipping than other transportation forms. The oceans are wide and deep, which means ships are only limited in size around canals, straits, and port facilities. You cannot operate larger trains, trucks, or planes as easily, as they require larger roads, rails, or runways to accommodate them. In a geopolitical sense, a transoceanic canal provides a method to project naval and mercantile power to faraway locations. Great naval powers can use canals to police, intimidate, and attack countries thousands of kilometers from their homeland. Securing a canal can also allow preferential passage to friendly countries and corporations while attacking the trade of rivals. For these reasons, canals are important to the foreign policies of many states, both past and present, around the world. A crucial feature of many canals is a lock, which serves as a regulator between different water levels. This allows ships to traverse changes in altitude they might not be able to normally. This is how a canal lock works. A boat sails into a lock chamber through one end and prepares for the change in water level. Once in the chamber, both ends are closed. Once closed, water is either added or drained depending on whether the water level is being raised or lowered, respectively. Once the desired water level is reached, the other end of the chamber is open and the boat sails out of the lock chamber. So what exactly is the Suez Canal? The Suez Canal is a waterway cutting from north to south across the Isthmus of Suez between the Nile Delta and the Sinai Peninsula. The canal connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, providing a significantly shorter route between Europe and Asia than the alternative, the Cape of Good Hope. For example, when sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, a journey from Rotterdam to Singapore is 6,480 kilometers longer when compared to the Suez Canal. This takes a significantly longer time and is therefore more expensive. Additionally, the Suez Canal does not use locks, as the water levels of the Mediterranean and Red Seas are roughly equal. It is essentially a cut across several points along the Suez Isthmus, forming a navigable route. Today, the Suez Canal is managed by the Suez Canal Authority, an Egyptian governmental agency. It is responsible for the operation and maintenance of the canal, relying on income from tolls it puts on ships for using the canal. There are many advantages to building a canal along the Suez Isthmus. For starters, the isthmus is relatively short to other options, with the shortest point being only 121 kilometers across. However, the modern canal instead lies along a longer portion at 193 kilometers. As established already, this is the shortest navigable sea route between the Mediterranean and Red Seas. Looking east, there are significantly higher elevations in the Sinai Peninsula and further east. Building a canal along these areas is difficult due to mountainous terrain. Cargo ships cannot easily travel over or under mountains, of course, meaning a canal will need to be built between gaps or require extensive demolition to remove mountains. This is both inconvenient and costly, and it is an important reason why the Suez was chosen over the Sinai Peninsula. Looking west, you will notice the Nile Delta, a major section of the Nile River. A historically important waterway, it was primarily responsible for the rise of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Now, you might be asking, why not use this river as part of the canal? It is already made after all. Although it is a waterway, the river would still need modification to fit the needs of the modern canal, such as depth and width alterations to handle large cargo ships. Following the river would also result in a much longer canal and a lack of fresh water for certain areas. Over the course of this series, we will explore the history of the canal, why it was constructed, and who was responsible for these decisions. Keep in mind the unique geography of the region when evaluating these decisions. Before the modern Suez Canal, there were many precursors. Given the importance of the canal today, you can imagine that past empires and powers also pursued construction of canal for their own benefit. The first of these was the Canal of the Pharaohs, also known as the East-West Canal, built in 1850 BCE. As the name implies, this canal was built and used by the ancient Egyptians. After the Roman conquest of Egypt, the canal was rebuilt and expanded. This new and improved canal, built between 96 and 117 CE, was named Trajan's Canal, after the Roman Emperor. Similar to the Canal of the Pharaohs, Trajan's Canal also fell into disrepair as the Roman Empire declined. After Rome collapsed, the canal was in the hands of the Byzantine Empire, who also left it neglected and unusable. Again, much later, the Umayyad Caliphate, an Arabian Islamic empire, conquered Egypt and rebuilt the canal. This canal was well used and once again provided a short and continuous waterway between the Mediterranean and Red Sea. Years later, the Abbasid family, with the assistance of many smaller groups, overthrew the Umayyads and became the caliphs, rulers of the empire. Eventually, when revolts broke out in the militarily and culturally important cities of Mecca and Medina, the Caliph Abu Ja'far al-Mansur filled in the canal to prevent ships from reaching them. Now, it's important to note that the goal of these ancient canals was always to connect the Nile Delta to the Red Sea, rather than provide a connection directly between the Red and Mediterranean seas. This would change with the rise of European maritime empires dependent on sea commerce, such as the Venetians, the French, and the British. During the Middle Ages, most sailing was done close to the coast, using landmarks for navigation. Around the 15th century, advancements in navigation and technology allowed ships to sail farther away from the coast, in open water. The Iberians were primarily responsible for these advancements in deep-water navigation. During this time, Prince Henry of Portugal began encouraging exploration of the world's oceans. A primary reason as to why he wanted to do this was to circumvent the Ottoman Empire. Many trade routes to India became inaccessible after the Ottoman conquest of southeastern Europe, while their strong navy prevented the Portuguese from using naval routes through the Mediterranean. Prince Henry used these new techniques, along with better shipbuilding, to create maritime trade routes to India. Throughout the 15th century, several expeditions were launched that would eventually circumnavigate the African continent. These sea routes reduced the Middle East's monopoly on Eastern trade, but were still time-consuming, costly, and unreliable. Many other nations during this time pondered the idea of building a canal in the area. For example, in 1517, the Ottomans, after conquering Egypt, believed the canal would bolster their control over the region, allowing them to connect their trade and pilgrimage routes. The canal would be a shortcut that the Europeans would come to rely on, and thus restore Ottoman dominance in trade. Ultimately, the cost of such a canal was deemed too expensive, and the idea was abandoned. Another group that would try about a decade later were the Venetians, for similar reasons. They wanted to weaken the Portuguese dominance of trade. However, the idea was once again dismissed as the cost was too great. It wasn't until 1798, when Napoleon conquered Egypt, that the idea of the canal came about once again. Fascinated with the ancient canals in the area, he commissioned his engineers to survey the land and prepare plans for a new canal. However, his engineers came to the conclusion that the water level of the Red Sea was about 8.5 meters higher than the Mediterranean. As with other attempts, Napoleon decided to abandon the project due to the cost. Unbeknownst to him, this was simply a measurement error by his engineers, and it was later found that the water levels were very similar, allowing the canal to be built without locks, and therefore for much cheaper than originally thought. However, the idea of the canal remained with the French, and in a few decades, Ferdinand de Lesseps would receive an act of concession, allowing him to start construction. Next time, we will cover the construction of the modern Suez Canal, following Ferdinand and the British.